Morning, people. I'm getting an early roll today. It's not even 7 o'clock, and I'll be on the road shortly. Just want to get up to Spiceland at a decent time.
Please drive to highlighted route.
I feel better than I did yesterday morning. That is for sure. Got up yesterday and I just wanted to go back to bed.
Please drive to highlighted route.
Just wanted to go back to bed. But not today. I felt a lot better. It's supposed to be rainy today. Thunderstorms today and tomorrow for this area. But, you know, us truckers, we're hardly in the same area long enough for a weather forecast to really mean much to us. Or at least the one we started there, for the area we started. Oh. Coffee time. No more no, blah. Let's try that one again. No more morning cold air with my coffee. Gotta turn the AC on now. It's 80 degrees where I'm at right now. And it's only 6:40. And it's 80 degrees. Ooh. And it's supposed to start raining where I'm going. Or no. The rain is moving north of me. I've got to drive 2 hours south and then turn around and drive 4 hours north to Effingham, Illinois. It's a really nice spot. If you ever go through there, it's a really nice spot to stop. There at 160, there's a Pilot and a TA next to each other with a streaking beacon. If you get off before it, there's a TA. And then there's a smaller, it might be a Flying J. Pilot, Flying J, they're the same at this point. At 162. Watch out for that traffic though going Indianapolis. They're on 70. Which I have to drive through today. Yeah, it's Food Bar. They got an early start this year, I guess, and they're tearing up the whole damn road. Put down a new road. So I guess in the long-term thing, they are kind of being smart because they're going ahead and going down to the foundation of the road and beefing it up, considering, believe it or not, I'd say about 75% of the highways out there and interstates, their foundations were made in the 60s and the 70s, I think. And they weren't built to withstand the weight of as many trucks as traveling on them. Because you remember back in them days, it was single rear axle tractors with, I think they were 30-foot trailers. All I know is they weren't 53-footers. They had smaller trucks back in the day, smaller trailers, smaller loads. Yeah, pretty sure loaded they weighed about half of what a tractor and a trailer unloaded weigh nowadays. But that's just me pulling shit out of my ass. It's good coffee. That might be the useless knowledge of the day. I don't know. Damn it, I had something on the tip of my tongue and now it just flew away. Just flew away. Well, I gotta finish doing my planning trip. Well, it's already planned. I entered in my GPS to make sure that I get mildly current traffic conditions. That just to make sure I'm going the right way. Because, well, at this point I could probably drive without the GPS, but having that there for traffic conditions and just to let you know how much longer you gotta go is kind of helpful. Of course, I run Google, and then I have a Garmin, which is a really nice Garmin. It's the 8-inch. Starting to wish I would have got the 7-inch with the camera, but I wanted the bigger display because I was so used to those 4-inch ones, and I know that going down the road those can get pretty small when you've got your traffic or your trip info on one side and your map on the other, where this one, heck, just the map with the trip info up, just the map portion is about as big as the screen on every other GPS I've had. So it's like having a GPS and a half. But it's nifty because I can do that. That's the main reason. I got this one. You can pull it off and put it back. Oh no. No. Well, I'm gonna cut this off. Get this pre-strip going and then get rolling. Talk to you later. Well, I got to Hino a lot earlier than I normally do. And I'm going to be leaving about the time I normally get there. So there's some perks and positive notes for today. Good Lord, is it hot. 82 degrees. And it looks like it's trying to thunderstorm. So hot weathers and thunderstorms. Recipe for storms. Sorry about the hazard clicking. I'm going through the parking lot here. Trying to get out of Hino so I can head north. Got about 4.5 hours till Effingham. I'll stop and take my break. Get some fuel and some grub. Hang on. Alright, I'm good. I'm out of the gate. Gotta check in with the gate lady there. There's a couple of them that I see on occasion, but I like the older lady that's there. She's already got me written down. She knows what I'm doing, where I'm going, and she's just got to write down what trailer I leave the yard with. She don't even know my name no more. So, yes, that's the perks of being a regular. Oh, it's hot. That's the only thing I hate about this damn Cascadia. I can never get the temperature to regulate the way I want. I'm either too cold because the vents are blowing right on my arm or on my face, and it's my legs and my chest and my torso that are hot. Or it's too hot like it is right now. So I got the air cranked. I'm going to let the whole cab kind of cool off, and then I'll probably leave the temperature low and turn the fan speed down. Last night I was talking about the fiascos with my personal vehicles and life, so figured I'd talk a little about that right now. Just kind of help pass the time, which is about all I do when I do these. So, my first car was an 02 gold with the metallic flake factory color Dodge Neon. I got it when it had 300,000 miles on it. It was old and wore out, and I'm pretty sure it was a company car for somewhere for 300,000 miles for an 02. My brother-in-law had it for probably about 2 or 3 years before I had it. He probably put the last 50,000 miles on it because he used it for work because he traveled. And then I bought it off him and my sister. And that was my first car. Little 2-door, 4-cylinder, no bells and whistles, manual crank windows, manual locks, no trunk pop button. But for an 02, no trunk pop button. It was annoying as hell. Anytime I needed to pop the trunk, when I was in the car, I had to turn the car off and go open the trunk. For a 4-cylinder, it wasn't really that great on gas, but I found out later kind of what that issue was, and I'll cover it in the story. But I was driving it all through high school. All right, come on, people. What are we doing? What are we doing? We're in the middle of the road. You got 2 lanes here. Come on, Snyder. Must be training. No, I'm going left, not right. But yeah, had all through high school. It was the car that me and my friends always ran around in because I was like the first one to get my license and have my own car. Had fun in that car. Like I was saying last night, I learned how to work on it. I went through a handful of motor mounts because I think I got defective ones. Or no. I changed all the motor mounts and then come to find out that the main motor mount wasn't called a motor mount. It was called a or no. Let me rephrase that. The main motor mount that this car had was on the driver's side, and it was literally in the wheel well. So like you had to drop the motor to change it. Well, it was like the worst one out of the 5 motor mounts this car had, and I changed the other 3 because it was a top and bottom mount for the bottom driver's side, top passenger side, and then there was one called a transmission mount, but it was the motor mount too. So I changed like 2 of them, and then within a year or 2 they wore out too again, and I had to replace them because the other 2 mounts that I didn't know about until later were gone. So all the dampening and force was being put on the other 2, and that made them go out prematurely. Anyway, long story. Got that all fixed. Of course, this was me in high school in the late 2000s. I ended up getting me a set of 10s in the trunk because this is the car with both seats folded back, and you had a full space between the trunk and the back seat. But this was after high school. But before that, I had a couple small speakers, but nothing worth talking about. But after I graduated high school, I got a set of 10 Audiobahn dual voice coils. They were the chrome flame series, to where the grill on the back was fire, was shaped like flames, and it was chromed. It's flame chrome series. and I was running them off 1200 watt Kenwood amp. And like everybody that got in my car, they'd sit in the back seat because I had the speakers facing the seats. Mainly because I was still using the trunk because I worked on cars myself and I didn't have a garage or anything. So all my tools stayed in the car. So the tools stayed in the trunk by the rear. The speaker box was in the trunk facing the front. And this speaker box, it was a homemade speaker box because I bought this whole setup off a dude I knew for $300, which that was a pretty good deal, I think. And like everybody that got in my car loved my car. Everybody loved my car. We called it Frankenstein because the front end had damage to where I had a parking lot fender bender where somebody stopped short on me going over a speed bump in a parking lot, and it crushed the front end of the hood. But that was the first fiasco of the whole working on this car myself. It took out one of the support struts on the top that held the radiator in place. Luckily enough, it didn't bust the radiator, so it didn't leak any. It just lost pressure in that support. This story's gonna jump around a little, so sorry. As I'm remembering it, so it's natural and unedited. It's raw. So I had to change the radiator. That was a fun fiasco because it was I think it was in November, right before it was snowing. So literally, I get the radiator changed and it just pours snow for 2 days. Yeah. Changing something that contains fluids and cold temperatures is not fun. Had it for a couple more years. And then one night coming home from work, I realized that my car was starting to overheat. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. This thing sounds like it's bogging. Oddly enough, at the same time, I had a wheel bearing that was going bad. But I still had to work until I could replace it because I had to make the money to get the parts to replace it. But yeah, I was driving it and then I realized, okay, my temperature gauge is about pegged. My RPMs are about as high as I've ever seen, and I've been doing 60 for about 10 minutes, 20 minutes. So I'm halfway home. And then I come to the conclusion, my car's not been shifting. So I've been doing first, second gear at 60 miles an hour. Not good. So I realized all this after I stopped, and I always carried extra water in the rear. Because this was one of the cars that when the system got hot and it would purge all the excess fluid it didn't need in the system, it didn't just go to the reservoir. It actually went to the reservoir, and then the reservoir had an overflow spout that would drain. Well, I always kept water so I could keep it topped off for when it did that. And luckily enough, I had a gallon of water. I poured it in there. Got back in the car. Of course, I had turned it off at this point, but I left the key on so I could see the gauges. And I just watched the gauge come down. And I was like, oh, thank God. I didn't blow a head gasket or nuke the motor. But I had another 20 so minutes to get home, so I was like, all right, so I'm going to have to kind of limp this thing. And I think I did about 35, 40 the rest of the way home. And it spent me the better part, probably 6 months at the point where I didn't drive the car at all, figuring out what was wrong with it. And I went through all the things, what could be, and I was like, wait. The way this motor's made, the thing that makes it shift isn't internal. It's not an internal system. It's an external system. So I can pull off that valve block and replace it. Which I did, and it fixed my issues. Huzzah to pull apart kind of places, because they wanted $165 for a new transmission solenoid. I got it from the pull apart place for $16. And it was literally a bolt, unbolt, re-bolt, fixed the problem, plugged it in, fixed it. Well, funny enough, through this car's whole course of life that I owned it for like the last few years before that, it always had an issue of leaking transmission fluid. Guess what fixed when I changed the solenoid? It no longer leaks transmission fluid. The mating surface of the solenoid to the transmission's housing was just bad. Like whatever, something got in there when it was put together and it leaked. Or it had been serviced at some point and it leaked. So that fixed that. Well, during the whole course of like the 6 months that this car was down, I had been looking for another vehicle because I had to have a way to get around. Because I was working, so I had to have people take me back and forth to work and all this other good stuff. Because I'm out of high school at this point. And that's when I bought my Mazda. It was a 98 Mazda B3000. It was white, 5-speed, 2-door short cab. But I had the long bed. Alright? It was supposed to be 4-wheel drive. Because it had the transfer case. But whoever had the truck before me, because they told me they pulled the motor and did a backyard rebuild. Because they said they pulled the motor and transmission and rebuilt them. $1,000, I wasn't going to complain because the thing started, ran, and drove. But the inside of it was all jacked up. Seats were torn. There was no radiator, or no radio, so I drove for about 2 months with no radio in this truck. That'll drive you crazy. The shifter was as loose and as sloppy as a 5-speed could be, but it shifted in all gears and it had a little pep in its go. First thing I had to do with this truck after I bought it is I had to put new tires in the rear, because whoever had been driving this truck apparently liked to do burnouts, because both rear tires were just about slicks. Oh, and when they pulled the motor to do their rebuild, they pulled away all the heat shielding to the floorboard and the firewall. So anytime you're driving this truck, there's nothing but you felt nothing but heat coming from the floorboard and the firewall from the exhaust headers that were right below your feet. So like the heat worked in this truck great, no air. Like I'm surprised the actual vents worked. Like in the wintertime, this truck was great to drive because you were always warm. Again, manual windows, manual locks. I learned a lot of working on cars with that thing too, because I think a couple months after I had to do the tires, I had to replace the little vacuum line sensor thing that controlled the flap for the thermostat heater core control thing. But that was just a piece of plastic hoses, so that was an easy fix. What was the other thing? I think it was my steering pump, or not the steering pump. What was that? Oh, I don't remember off the top of my head, but there was something I had to pull a pulley off to fix something, and I had to do that in the parking lot. I think it had something to do with a belt, or I had a pulley that was eating a belt because it the pulley itself was all gnarled up, so it was eating belts. So I had to replace the pulley. I ended up having to do that in the parking lot because it ate a belt in like 2 days. So I had to do that in the parking lot of the parts store because it happened in front of the parts store, luckily. Yeah, it was supposed to be 4-wheel drive now. It's supposed to be 4-wheel drive. Well, they took out the front differential and everything that went with it and the front drive shaft. So I had a transfer case but nothing from the transfer case forward to make it four-wheel drive. And then, the other thing, like this was later on in the life of the truck when I had to replace the leaf springs in the rear of this truck. That's a headache. Like when you don't know you don't know how to check your dimensions to make sure they're the same from truck to truck, whatever. That's a pain in the ass, figuring out leaf springs. But yeah, I was pulling out of my driveway and it was muddy. And of course, when it's muddy and you're in a truck, you're gonna just keep spinning tires till you catch traction. So you just kind of kept it in low gear and just give it a little gas, little gas, little gas. And I was moving, but I was spinning tires. And then finally, when I caught traction, I just felt a thud. And then driving down the road the rest of the way, and I was like, this just feels wrong. So I ended up turning around and going home, because I went like half a mile down the road. Got back, looked under the truck, my leaf spring on the driver's side, like 6 inches from where it meets the mount for the bolt, the leaf spring had snapped. Well, it was at this point that I realized, okay, if this one just broke, let me check the other one. Like this truck had always kind of sat funny. And now I knew why. The truck had 3 leaf springs between the 2 sides. 3. Now, you're probably asking, how did it only have 3? Shouldn't there be 4 or more? Technically, this truck should have had 6. When they went to the 2000 models, that's when they made it to where it was 4 each side. So any Ranger made after like 2000 or 99 has 8 leaf springs between the 2 sides. Well, this truck had 3. Alright. The driver's side had the main leaf spring and then that little overload thing, which you don't really count that as a spring, considering it's literally just a piece of flat bar. There's no flex to it. But I guess you could call it a leaf. The other side had 2 leaves that were half leaves. Like one side connected to the front mount and went through the center and then ended just about where the overload spring would end. Alright? And then the rear one came from the shackle and did the same thing. So it was literally like there wasn't one solid leaf on the passenger side. It was 2 half leaves, or 2 halves of a leaf. So yeah, needless to say, this truck was a redneck backyard ingenuity project. That, and I found out that they had overloaded this truck at least once at the time, because I'm guessing they were trying to lower it right around the time they were doing burnouts. I'm guessing they flipped the leaves to kind of make it squat lower at the time, or they overloaded them, or they might have heated them. But a leaf spring is generally supposed to make a swoop-in shape. Now, mine did this. Mine were like upside down. But it still gave the lift because it was four-wheel drive, because they come with like factory blocks to make the rear end sit a little higher for ground clearance. Yeah, this truck was a redneck ingenuity marvel. Oh, and then the whole radio issue. Like I said, I drove for 2 months in this truck with no radio. Luckily, at the time, I had a Bluetooth speaker, so I would just put the Bluetooth speaker in the dash and play music on my phone. That's the only thing that saved me in this truck. But after doing some exploratory in the dash, trying to figure out what's up with the radio and why there wasn't one there, found out whoever had been here before me had cut the factory radio wires like the last 3 3 or 4 inches that's there, so it's easy to unplug and replug in your radio. They cut back that much. So literally, like, it was literally coming out of the bundle for the wire harness. The part that's wrapped in the electrical tape and all that mesh stuff that they use to keep wires bound up nice and tight in the dash. Yeah, it was cut off right above that. So whoever did this had no clue apparently what they were doing, other than the fact that they could splice wires. Because anybody knows if you're going to have to cut a pigtail on a radio to put a radio in, you don't cut it all the way back. You literally cut it right there at the plug if you're going to go that route. Well, pull aparts to the wind again. Found a Ranger, and I went in there and I did what they basically did to mine, to the donor truck that I got parts off of. But like, I went further back. Like, I unwound a good bit of wire, so I had probably 6 inches of wire, because I had to pull the whole dash apart and undo some wire loom and ungrout it from some spots to get that lengths of wire that I needed to where I could splice them together. And most people will say, don't use butt connectors, don't use bullet connectors, solder them or blah, blah, blah. Well, I didn't know how to solder at the time, and I didn't have anything but electrical tape, wire strippers, and bullet connectors. So I made sure to strip them back enough that when I stuck them with the bullet connectors, they overlapped each other. So I kind of did like when somebody solders wires and they know what they're doing a good job, they'll like spread them a little and they'll push them together, and then they'll kind of twist them to where they're interlocking. Well, I kind of did that with the bullet connector, and then I crimped them on both sides really good, and then I wrapped the whole length of the connector from the wire that the 2 wires I connected. There was tape going across the whole thing so that it had a really good solid connection. I had to do that for like 10 wires, and then I wrapped all that, so like this stuff wasn't coming apart. And then after that was my issue with finding a radio. Figured, nah, I'm not going to go factory. I've had my Bluetooth speaker for the longest time. I wanted Bluetooth or something with an aux port. Well, I got a steal for a old Sony radio off of Marketplace. It's a beater with a heater. I'm not going to drop $300 on a new radio for this thing. So I just went on Facebook. I think I paid $20 for a radio. Popped her in. Went to Walmart. I got the adapter plug, of course, and I got the bezel. So now the dash didn't have a gaping hole in it. And I rocked that truck for probably 4 years. Well, all in the process of having it, I got the car fixed. So I had 2 vehicles at the time. Because while the car was down, I had bought the truck because I needed a way to get back and forth to work. And then probably within 6 months of getting the truck, I got the car fixed because I found out the issue, but it took me forever to get the time and the money to go and find parts for it. Because during this whole time, I was still trying to troubleshoot it. But yeah, my first cars were a Dodge Neon and a 98 Mazda B3K. And like I was saying on the video last night, same thing as a Ranger, just a different trim. It's the only thing that separates them is the trim level. I want to say maybe the color of the interior as well. That might be different. And I had that truck until 3 years ago. Because, oh yeah, there's that. My Neon finally, eventually, the timing belt went on it going down the road when my brother-in-law, not the one I bought it from, my other one, anyhow, it went out on my brother-in-law going down the road. Timing belt went out. So So that got parked, and it took me forever because I was figuring, like, hey, can I change this myself? Can I do this in the driveway? Is this something I need to drop the motor, or can I leave it in the car? And it was probably a year. Probably a year of me trying to figure this out. Well, I had the Mazda, so it really wasn't a big deal. And then a friend of mine that I went to church with was talking about selling his Ranger, an 04 Ford Ranger. It was a 4.0 with the 410 gears in the rear. So like, this was the nice one. This truck was nice. I'm a third owner. It had just rolled 200,000 miles when I got it from him, but like 90% of those were highway miles because he would drive back and forth to Virginia where his family was. And this was the kind of guy that if he heard a sound, he'd replace it. He wouldn't try to figure out what it was and just fix what was making the sound. Like, he literally pulled the motor or the transmission out of this truck and swapped in another transmission because he heard a tinging. And then that transmission turned out to not be what he was told it was because he bought it used. So he just took and had the original transmission rebuilt, and then they put a new clutch and put the rebuilt original transmission back in the truck. So when I bought it from him, it had like less than 300 miles on a new transmission. So I bought the truck with a brand new transmission and a new fresh clutch. And that was like 7 years ago. And then I just had to put a new clutch on it. Well, I didn't have to replace the clutch. It was I think it was a throwout bearing. It was getting old and wore out. And then while they were in there, they're like, hey, your clutch is getting worn out. It's not bad yet, but like, you might have another year or two out of it. You want to go ahead and change the clutch while we're here? And I'm like, yeah, go ahead. So I just went ahead and had a new clutch and a new master cylinder and everything put in. Or slave cylinder, because it's hydraulic. Yeah, I've learned a lot from before I started driving a truck. I did a lot of stuff with cars. I did a lot of radio work. I got another radio story for another time. And I probably had both the trucks until about 2 years ago. Yeah, so I got rid of my car about 2 years after I got the Mazda. At about the third year having the Mazda, I bought the Ranger. And so I was at that point, I was just driving the Ranger all the time because it was nice. It had heat and air. It was an extended cab. It's an extended cab with the half doors. I could get 4 people in the truck comfortably and all that good stuff. So I stopped driving the white truck. So that was usually the car that everybody borrowed when they needed to borrow a truck. Because I was like, you can use the Mazda. Because it was reliable. There was nothing wrong with it. It was good. But probably it's sad. I was telling you a story about how I blew up the rear end. That was the main story I was wanting to tell you. But you got the whole encyclopedia of my car history. Probably 2 years before I got rid of it, it sat parked for a year because the rear end was blown up. Like, it would still drive around, but like I was missing teeth off the ring gear and off the pinion. So it just sat because I didn't want to damage it further. I'd go out and I'd start it every once in a while. I'd run down and get some gas in it so I could keep it idling around the yard. And I was just kind of doing my research again, trying to figure out what rear ends I could put in the truck. Like, what junkyard rear end could I just go unbolt and rebolt in? And that's when I come to find out about the different axles and the different gearing and the different style of differentials for the Rangers. Well, the whole way I messed it up is where I live, there's a stoplight at the city limits. It's on the highway going out of town. Well, I was slowing down coming up to that interstate or that intersection, and I was downshifting. Had a drink in one hand, so I was driving with one hand on the shifter, one hand with a cup, holding the steering wheel. Well, I had downshifted, as you do when you're slowing down. I think I got down to about second gear, and the light turned green on me. And there was only one or two cars ahead of me, and I was still slowing down to come to the stop. And they took off because it turned green. Well, I was like, you know what? I like hearing this thing rev out because this thing had a nice warble to it from like the 3 exhaust leaks it had before the muffler. So I was like, I'll wind her out. So I was in second gear, probably doing about 20, and I just kind of gave it gas and was accelerating. Well, I was like, oh shit, I'm juggling a drink in my hand and a shifter. And I think I swapped hands with my drink, and I was like, shit, I need to shift. Well, I ended up giving it gas too long, too hard, at too low of a speed, and I heard a kind of like a pop, and kind of like a loss of power. Like it was driving fine, and then it went lame, like I lost a cylinder or something. And it didn't act right. Like, and I pulled over, and I got under the truck. Like, okay, did I blow up the transmission? Am I leaking fluid? Did I just explode the housing? Nothing like that. I get her home, and I'm like, hey, this happened. What do you think it is? Because I'm talking to my dad. And that's when I was like, let me check the rear end. So I jacked her up, put her on Jack's hands, got under there, popped off the diff housing, drained the fluid, pulled it down, and that's when I saw teeth sitting inside the pumpkin. I was like, oh no, that's not good. This was before the neon busted the timing belt. So it sat parked, and I was just driving the neon around. But in the process of getting the truck fixed is when I was talking to the guy I know that had the Ranger I bought from. He helped me go get the axle in the truck, all that other good stuff. So there for about probably 6 months I didn't have a vehicle. And that's when I finally just bought his Ranger from him. And then I had another one. Yeah, it spent me about a year to find an axle that I could afford. I think the junkyard that I normally went to, I think they wanted like $300 for an axle. Well, at this point, I had a loan for the Ranger, so I was paying $200 a month on that, and I was working at Walmart, not making a lot of money. It sat for a year, and then I finally found a rear end on Facebook, lo and behold, from some guy that had just did a solid axle swap on a Ranger. It was the exact axle I needed. It was a 7.5, 373 gears. It bolted right up, filled it full of differential fluid, bolted it to the leaves, put the shocks in, put the drive shaft on. I drove it the day I put it on, and didn't have an issue out of it since. Like after I did that, like it seemed to not have that sluggish power anymore. Yeah. I guess that's enough rambling now about my car history. Probably gonna get a lot of should have had this, should have had that, or someone suggesting I get a Chevy. Not sure if I'll use this today, but today is the 5th. That's for editing purposes.